We are really lucky to have you. You came all the way from Arizona, and
I did.
This is really incredible. So without further ado, does anybody want to grab a cookie at the last minute? Okay, otherwise you have to be real quiet when you go get one. And I introduce to you Miss Judy Laufer.
Thank you. And thank you, Sandra, for the very kind introduction. And I just went and toured the exhibit. Oh my God, it is amazing. So I don't know if all of you have done that, but great job. Sandy, kudos to you in putting that together and this speaker series. I'm honored to be part of it, and I'm honored that you asked me. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight. Let me see if there we go. So tonight, I really, okay. Is it on?
Now it is.
Is it on?
There we go. Much better.
Tonight, I want to talk to you not about facts or dates, but a moment in time. So you see the mother and daughter hanging clothes, something that people did quite often. Wash your clothes, hang it on a line. This could have been Pearl and her mother. They're hanging clothes, it's a nice day, it's warm out, and all of a sudden, they hear the rumbling of trucks. And then they hear shots, machine guns, and people screaming. They froze. The Germans are coming, not someday, not soon, but today. So my name is Judy Laufer, and I write under the name J.E. Laufer, and I write children's books. I started off writing children's books, and you can see some of them here. I used to be a kindergarten teacher. I started off as a kindergarten teacher. I worked in curriculum development. I was president of a day school. I worked for a publishing company and did workshops for teachers in the Southwest region. So I've had a lot of time in the whole education field, and I've enjoyed working with children. And I started off in the early childhood realm, and then not too long after that, well, a couple of years later, I realized that my parents had interesting stories, and my in-laws had interesting stories, and that's what those two books are about that I'm going to talk to you about. So I was born in Budapest. I grew up in Montreal. My parents are both Holocaust survivors. I was educated in Montreal. As I say, taught kindergarten there. I worked as a consultant for a company called Addison Wesley. I don't know if anybody's heard of them. It's an international company. And I did workshops for kindergarten through third grade in the Southwest region. And I've been recognized for both my writing and educational leadership, which I'm very proud of. So how did my writing career start? My writing career started with my first book, and it was called Where Did Papa Go? My dad passed away, and I had a young niece who was 5, and she was having a difficult time dealing with the death of her grandfather. So being a teacher, I went to the library, and I looked for a book, thinking, I'm sure I can find a book to help her. There must be a book that was written. And at that time, there were no books for really young children about someone dying, about a person dying. There were books about the weather changing, the seasons changing, and explaining death that way. There were books about a pet dying, but not a person. And so it wasn't really that relevant for my niece. I then decided I really like writing, and I'm going to write a story about her and her grandfather. And that's how that began. I then found a poetry contest, international poetry contest, and the story that I wrote was in rhyme and in poetry. So I thought, well, I'll try it. I'll enter the contest and see what happens. Well, it won the Golden Poet Award. And we went to New York and met with a variety of celebrities who had also written books. It was quite a New York event. And that started my initial writing. I then decided, since a lot of other people seemed to enjoy the book and needed this book, that I would figure out how to publish the book. I first went and sent the book off to the regular publishers, the big publishers that everybody goes to. And they sent back a message saying, yeah, we like it, but we're not ready to do it right now, and we don't have the time, and and then one of them actually sent me the book back in the kind of paper and illustration that it would be done, and I didn't think it was very good. So I then decided, well, why can't I publish? So I decided to self-publish that book, and that was 35 years ago. The book is still in circulation. It was one of the best-selling books of our whole series. Many people from all over the country call and ask for that book. They've heard about it, they need it, they have a young child that they need to explain what happened or help them through the grief process. All of my children's books, really the goal is to promote reading. That reading should be fun, but also that the books have a message to them. And that we should be talking to kids, we should be engaging them in the stories. So all the books are a platform for discussion as well. So how did the publishing company start? Little Egg Publishing. People often ask me that. Where does the name come from? So my maiden name was Eggette, and when I was in elementary school, often, kids will tease each other, and I would come to school and the kids would say, oh, look, here comes Little Egg. So when I was thinking about the publishing company, and it was all young children's books, I thought, that might be a good name for my publishing company. And Little Egg, Eggette, sounds good, and that's how the idea was hatched. The books, people often ask me, what are your books like? What kind of books do you really write, the children's books? And it's pretty much the best way for me to explain it. It's Walt Disney meets Dr. Seuss, two of my favorite authors growing up. Walt Disney, because they're very colorful, bright books, as you can see. And Dr. Seuss, because those crazy, zany characters that kids all love to read about. And it's all written in rhyme. And as an educator, we know that children learn to read faster when they learn through rhyme. Rhyme seems to be a great way to engage kids early reading. So I decided, I really like rhyme, I'll try that, and that's where all those books come from. The other thing is there's several modalities that kids learn in. So we've got kids who are visual readers, kids who are auditory readers, and kids who kind of like to feel stuff, and that's how they learn. So, this meets two of the modalities because in our books, the rhyming word is a little bit larger, so visually kids can see the rhyming word, and then of course they can hear it, and they can predict the word. There's Where Did Papa Go, the first book. That was the first children's book that won an award. It won the Independent Publishers Award. So what is Gigglyville, which is where all the stories take place? All of my children's stories take place in Gigglyville. Gigglyville is an imaginary, fun, happy place. And it's a great place to escape to when things aren't so happy and great like in this world. So I love going to Gigglyville. Fun place to escape to. And one of my thoughts is life is better when you're laughing. So if we can encourage children to see humor and to laugh a little bit more, just a better way to get through the day. Then along came the two young adult books. So I had written several children's books, and then as I say, my parents were getting older. Well, actually my father had passed away. My mother was getting older. She was heading towards her 90th birthday. And a few years before, so she was probably 87, we talked a little bit about her journey, what had happened. What happened in the Holocaust, what happened after the Holocaust, how did they create life after so many terrible things. And so I decided to interview her. And I don't know how many of you have had a chance to interview a Holocaust survivor, but it's not easy, and it's even more difficult when it's your mother. So listening to her, I tried to do a lot of listening, and I let her do a lot of speaking. She would remember some things, she wouldn't remember some things made her cry. She was very sad. It was a really sad time, but she was interested in getting this book done, which I thought was great, because she is one who didn't do a lot of speaking, and when we were growing up, she really didn't talk a lot about the Holocaust. It was more my dad, and often you'll find people who, one of them talks a lot about the Holocaust, and the other one doesn't want to hear about it, and that was pretty much in our house. So we worked on the book together. It took about 3 years. And that book, I sent it off to the Moonbeam Children's Book Awards, which is a pretty prestigious children's book award company. They do books they do awards, their national awards, and some they get people who send their work in internationally. So it's a really reputable award company. And the book won silver. So Choices won silver. And then a couple of years later, because my mother-in-law was a few years younger than my mother, she was turning 90, and so I said to her, well, would you like to have your story done? And I'm happy to write it for you. And again, their interviewing process was difficult. Again, there was a lot of moments where we had to stop, but we did get her book done, and it was quite funny because initially she was not too excited about it because she was worried about what people would think or how she would say things. And but when the book was nearly finished, she said to me, she goes, "So when's that book being done? When's that book going to be finished?" And I go, "Yeah, it's at the printer. It should be soon." She goes, "Oh, because all my friends are asking about it." So she's now told all her friends. And that won the Golden Book Award, which was really nice because a lot of pressure on me, as I thought I had written this book for my mother, and it did really well. I wanted to make sure her book was just as good, so she wouldn't think I spent more time on my mother's book than her book. And so she actually won the Gold Medal Award. So back to Pearl. So what was it like for her? 1939 is where we begin her story. It was actually the time Hitler's troops were now advancing into Poland. And that's where her story starts. Lots of horror, as if you go up to the museum that you created, you can see all that was going on all over different countries. The Germans looted, they murdered. It was an awful, awful time. She was 10 years old. So imagine 10 years old having to deal with this. Her world and her family's world was turned upside down in a day. I told you the story about hanging the clothes out. It happened very much like that. They knew things were happening and they heard things were happening, and they expected that the Germans might be there, but nobody really believed it. So until it actually happened, they didn't really believe it was going to happen. Again, just another child targeted for death by the Gestapo. They didn't really care. They didn't really care how old you were. And as long as you had any kind of Jewish blood, you were fair game. Families were torn apart. Parents frantically searched for ways to protect their children, just as any other parents would do in any other situation. This was even more grave. There were children that were sent to camps immediately or sent with their families, but there were also children like Pearl who didn't look Jewish. And Jewish was supposed to be dark hair, dark eyes, maybe some pointed features, but they had a certain look that they looked for in Jewish, to identify Jewish kids. My mother-in-law was blonde hair, blue-eyed, just like many other people at the time in Poland. And so those children could be hidden. And some of them were, we read about Anne Frank. Anne Frank was hidden in the attic. Some people were hidden in basements. But then there was this whole group of children that were hidden basically in plain sight. They were hidden within a family because they didn't look Jewish. I always like to put a map in my book because I do a lot of speaking in front of middle school, high school kids, and it's really nice for them to get a sense of where the area is and what the surrounding countries were, how close Germany was to Poland, how close Russia was. Now of course they're hearing about Ukraine, so to see where Ukraine is. The red box, even though it's spelt as it is pronounced Rzeszów. So Rzeszów was where my mother-in-law was born and where she grew up. One of the things I talk a lot about when I go to schools is to emphasize that these are stories about real people. They're not just stories. They're not just made-up stories. They're real people. Not only are they real people, they were my family. So up here, okay, the top picture is my mother-in-law, who was going to be my mother-in-law that I didn't know. Her name was Pearl Brachfeld, and with her is her soon-to-be husband in the picture, which is Jack Laufer. Jack Laufer married Pearl Brachfeld, and they became my in-laws later on. And on the bottom, my mother is Kati, and Kati's last name was Kraus. That was her maiden name, and my father was Adolf Egget. So Kati Kraus and Adolf Egget married, and those became my parents. I wanted to show you what Pearl looked like when she was younger. And you can see she had kind of a very non-Jewish look compared to what they were looking for in Jewish children. See the blonde hair? You can't see the blue eyes, but she actually had blue eyes. So at the same time, we know what was happening to Pearl. I just told you a little bit about what was going on in Poland. And my mother, who is 2 years older, in Hungary, well, what was going on in Hungary at the same time in the 40s? What was going on in that period of time where there was so much unrest? Well, back in Hungary, life was not easy either. Anti-Semitism, loss of rights, ghettos, yellow stars, those were all part of her life and her time. And I don't know how much you've read about the ghettos, but certainly ghettos, overcrowded, filthy, they were guarded, the lack of food, and then of course there was violence as well. So not an easy place to live. And this was before the camps, before they actually ended up in the camps. Later, Kati, my mom, and her family were deported to Auschwitz. So that's where we are in the middle of the 40s. So now we're going to finish with Pearl, because I want to tell you what was happening with her. And I'm going to go back to Hidden Pearl, which is a book over there. And I'm going to transport you back to that initial moment that we started with. So the moment that you saw Pearl and her mother hanging clothes. And I want to share with you how that is depicted in the story. So I'm going to read you a little excerpt from the book. You will meet in this little vignette Giselle, who's the mother, Pearl, the child, who's 10, and Chaim, who is the father. So this is out of the book. And this is right at the part that I was talking about at the beginning. So they now are hearing that something's happening. Suddenly, Giselle froze. She clutched the shirt she had been washing and turned sharply to look behind her. Giselle says, "Do you hear that?" to Pearl. Pearl squinted into the distance. At first, nothing. Then, faint cries rose from over the nearby hill. Pearl to Giselle. "What was that?" Giselle dropped the shirt still in her hand. Giselle to Pearl. "Go inside, get the others, hurry!" Pearl sprinted towards the house, just as a crowd of people came racing over the hill. Footsteps, shouts, crying children, the air filled with panic. Chaim opened the door just as they reached it. Chaim, what is it? Giselle, we need to leave now. We waited too long. The noise grew louder, screams, running, chaos. Their children crowded at the door, eyes wide, as neighbors fled down the dirt road. A passing neighbor to Chaim. Chaim, they're just a kilometer behind us. You've got to leave now. Giselle pulled the children back. Giselle, hurry, grab a shirt, a jacket, anything, to the children. Chaim stuffed food into a sack. Pearl threw on a blouse and her coat, even though it was warm. Pearl to Giselle. What about Bubby? Giselle softly. God help us. Chaim lifted little Shmuel onto his back. Chaim shouting to the kids, follow me. They all ran out the door. Pearl looked back, relieved to see her mother following. Giselle did a quick head count. Giselle to Chaim. Chaim, where's Meyer? Chaim. Meyer? I thought he was behind us. Giselle calling. Meyer, 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 where are you? Pearl's heart froze. She couldn't remember where she'd last seen her brother. Suddenly a shot rang out, then another. Screams filled the air. Behind them, military trucks approached. Soldiers, guns. Chaim to the children. This way, off the road, into the trees. They veered into the tall grass. Pearl felt the ground beneath her bare feet. She'd forgotten her shoes. Pearl to her mother. Mama! But another round of gunshots cut her off, and they kept running. What would you do if your life changed in 1 minute? If all of a sudden you had your whole family to protect? Where do you go? What do you take? That was their real story. And in interviewing Pearl, what I found very interesting is she kept reminding me about the no shoes. That was a big deal for her, that she forgot her shoes. And so the whole time she had no shoes. I'm going to end Pearl's story by showing you some of her siblings a little bit later on. So now we're going to move on to 1945. We're end of the war. This is her Pearl on the end, the shorter one, Pearl, her older sister next to her, and her older brother. In the next picture, you can see the older brother, Pearl, and Pearl's parents. And the rest of the story, if you would like to know what happened, you might want to read the book. Now, choices. Okay, so now we're after the war. There's lots that happened to Pearl, and there was so much that happened even before she was placed in a home, as really basically a servant girl to an anti-Semitic family. And something that I think you would find very interesting. The war ended, some people survived, some didn't, and you'll learn more about it as you read the book. Choices, however, starts after the war. So Choices starts, the story starts 11 years after the war. So I wanted to do one story about what happened during the Holocaust, and something that wasn't necessarily about the camps or people in the camps. I knew there were a lot of stories about that. And so Pearl's story was a different version of what happened during the Holocaust. My mother also was in the Holocaust, and as I mentioned before, she was in Auschwitz, her whole family was in Auschwitz. She's the only survivor of her family. She came back, nobody else came back. Parents, siblings, only survivor. She gets back to Hungary. My father also in a labor camp, comes back to Hungary. They end up meeting, they get married, they have 2 children. I'm one of the children, so I have an older brother who is almost 5, I'm almost 2. So Choices starts when the next big major event happened in their lives. So enough, you would say, enough that they survived the Holocaust. Now we're heading into the Hungarian Revolution, which was 1956. So people came back during the war, and they thought perhaps somebody was still alive. You know, they never really knew who was killed and who wasn't. They heard rumors. So they could go back to Hungary because they thought if somebody was left, if somebody was going to come back and they were going to try to reunite, where would they find them? If they went to America, or if they went to England, or if they went to Israel, wherever, how would they find them? So they waited in Hungary, because Hungary at that time wasn't great, but compared to what they had come from in the Holocaust, it was okay. You know, it was okay, and they had a lot of hope that maybe it would be better. Maybe there would be a better life for them. And years would go by, and people would come back, and they would find relatives that all of a sudden would, 3 years later, somebody would show up. They had been in a hospital, and they came back and they were reunited, and that gave everybody else hope that maybe they also had a family member that might show up. So Choices really is about after the Holocaust. It answers the question that people have been now asking, of those who survived, what happened next? This is a what happened next story. So we're now going into 1956. And I want to show you a little video that will give you insight into what was happening in even a year earlier, 1955, and then what happened in 56. So that video really gives you a little bit of a view of what was happening. So it started off, people had a lot of hope coming to Hungary. And Russia had been one of the allies. So they sort of trusted the Russians at the beginning. The Russians had been helpful. They helped liberate the camps. But as time went on, there was more restrictions, and a lot more anti-Semitism started to surface, and they felt like they were back to the same place they were in 44. So I want to also share with you an excerpt from that book, and the piece that I'm going to talk about is my parents did decide to leave. They decided, despite that my father had a mother and brother still living in Hungary, and they had to leave them, which was terrible. But they had 2 young children, and they felt they didn't want to live in a place where communism was thriving, and they felt unwelcome, and they felt that they wanted a free country for their children. So this excerpt from the book, they're now heading towards the border. They've paid somebody to help them cross the border, which was very common. It was extremely expensive. Most of their savings was spent on somebody that they hardly even knew that they had to give money to and hope that they would take them across the border. The children, so my parents had 2 children, and children weren't exactly welcome because you had to sneak across and you didn't want the children to start crying and give away the whole group. So if you brought your children, you had to be willing to give them sedatives so that they would sleep during the time, which was really scary because you didn't know what they were giving them and was this going to be okay. So the piece I'm going to read you now is that they're heading towards the border, and this is from the book. In this piece, you're going to meet the guide, Kati, my mom, and my father Adolf. Now they're not alone, they're with a group of people because they always take a group of people, a small group if they can, because they're worried about the noise. As they tromp through the barren fields, the soft rhythm of marching footfalls lulled Kati into a daze. The sun had just begun to rise when suddenly the guide raised his fist. The entire group halted. Kati's heart leapt. They silently gathered around the guide, waiting. Guide whispering, "The bridge is only about 2 kilometers up ahead, but the guard station is only half a kilometer away. Keep calm. I have it all under control. The guards have been bribed. They know what to do." Kati looked at her husband. The hesitation in his eyes made her stomach drop. They had placed their lives and a year's worth of money in the hands of a man they've met only hours ago. Her thoughts spiraled. She imagined all the ways this could go wrong. Adolf looked into her eyes and whispered, "Everything will be fine. We've made it this far." She nodded, swallowed her fear, squeezed Judith, her daughter, in her arms. There was no turning back, no option but forward. Yet the dread clung to her as they neared the station. Soon they could see it, a small structure lit by lanterns. Next to it, a long building with no windows. Each step felt like a walking off a cliff. As the group approached, a guard emerged from the hut, large, menacing, and stone-faced. He swung his machine gun around, pointed it directly at the group. "Guard, halt!" 2 more guards followed, all in black, all armed. The group froze. Eyes turned to the guide, but he said nothing. Tension thickened. The guard, "Where do you think you're going?" The guide stammered, where's Anton and Ivan?" "They finished their shift early today. Why?" The guide, now visibly shaken, No real reason." He turned to the group, eyes full of fear, his confidence gone. He had no plan. Kati closed her eyes. She prayed. In an instant, everything had changed. 3 machine guns pointed at them, their children in their arms, their lives hanging by a thread. To these guards, they weren't families, they were criminals. The guards could shoot. No one would question it. Maybe they would even get a medal for stopping the dissidents. Kati and her family would be buried in an unmarked grave, steps away from freedom. What would it take for you to risk everything? To run towards the unknown, just for a chance at freedom? If my parents had not made that choice, I would not be here tonight. So this is a picture of my mother and my mother-in-law proudly holding their books. They were in Phoenix. Some of my friends are here tonight, and they met my mother, and they've met my mother-in-law. And this was a picture of them in Phoenix. They were speaking to a young adult group. They were, my mother was probably 92 or 93, well, my mother-in-law was probably 92, and my mother was 94. My mother is the only one of the four that's still alive, and she just celebrated her 98th birthday. And she looks very much the same. Okay, what's going on at Little Ed Publishing? What's hatching? So I have such exciting news to share with you. The story that I just talked about, Choices, we're now looking at a film. Choices, the movie. So the new movie title will be Ashes to Iron, at least that's the working title. We're in serious discussion with Warner Brothers at the moment. They're very interested in the story, and we're just trying to finalize what comes next. Also, we have a new book that we've just released, a children's book, and it is about famous artists. So I'm working with actually a woman in San Diego who helped write the book. We co-wrote the book, and it's going to be released in Spanish as well. So it'll be our first Spanish book. We haven't done Spanish before. We'll see how that goes. And one of the things I'm very proud of is our work with nonprofits. And we work with a group called Kids Need to Read. Kids Need to Read sponsors books to libraries and schools. They mainly focus on underserved libraries and schools, but it's throughout the United States. So all our books are now nationally available all through the United States in different schools and libraries. And what have I learned so far from all of my travels? Well, I can tell you what I've learned is the happiest people don't have the best of everything, they make the best of everything. Happiness is a choice. Our selection of books, which you see here, there's more than on the screen. They are available on our website, on Amazon, on Kindle. The two young adult books are also audiobooks through Cherry Hill Publishing. They bought the rights to the the books. Yes, you can get more information on the website. I have cards on the table, so they have my website information, and you can go on the website. We are also, as everybody else, on social media. So we have the Facebook page, we have an Instagram. So if you'd like to join us, please do that. All that information is on our website. We have also donated all of these books to the library. So through Kids Need to Read and Little Egg Publishing in partnership, all these books will now be available at the library. Okay, now it's time for you to ask me questions. I've been speaking quite a while, and before I start with any questions that anyone might have, I think some of you got a card when you came in. Freema gave you a card. It has a name on it. It has something on the top of it. So that is your prize. If you have one of those cards, you get a free book tonight. And you get the free book with the name on it. So whichever card you have, after we're done, if you come up to see me, I will be happy to give you a book. The books are all signed by me, so you have a signed copy. Now I'm open for questions. Who would like to know anything about publishing, writing, movies, whatever? Yes, Sandy.
How did you get the photos saved? With like when your family was in hiding and things that were going on, how did they collect all the photos?
Which photos are you talking about?
The ones that you used in the book.
Okay, so
your family photos.
Right. So they kept a few photos, even in all of as they were running different places. Certainly, my mother-in-law and father-in-law. My father-in-law had his own pictures from his family because they weren't together at the time. But my mother-in-law, her family kept a lot of pictures. I don't know how they did it. They never ended up in the camps, right? and when you read the story, you'll read about they were the family that ended up in the forest. So if you've heard about the families that lived in the forest in Poland, that was my mother-in-law's story. And so, you know, they hid them, they kept them, they cherished them. Some of them they sent out at some point to some relatives in America, because they had people who had left earlier before the war, so they had pictures from them. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I know about it. Good question.
Thank you.
Anyone else with, yes?
Yeah, how did you get to Montreal?
How did I get to Montreal? Well, at that time, so it was 1956 when my parents escaped Hungary. And by the way, I didn't mention about 200,000 people escaped at that time. So think about it, 200,000 people. And of course, mostly not Jewish, but people who didn't want to live under communism. So we got to Montreal because my parents tried to get into the United States, and there was a quota, and it was easier to get into Canada. Many people, there was a large community of Holocaust survivors that ended up in Montreal. I think one of the largest in Canada was in Montreal. So yes, it was just, that's where they could go. Yes? Yes?
I'm curious if your parents had any specific fears of communism, if they'd heard of Stalin's purges, or it was more just the totalitarianism of it, or like what aspects of it were the most terrifying for them?
Well, I think really what was terrifying for my parents was they could see how things were going downhill in Hungary with communism in place, with the Russians in charge. There was lack of food. They had a lot of soldiers on the streets. It was, for my mother especially, very reminiscent of what she had gone through. And I think that something that drove her to actually push to leave, because she was the one that really pushed we gotta get out of here, is that perhaps this is another Holocaust. We didn't think it was last time, and we didn't leave on time last time. You know, and this time they had 2 children, so the stakes were higher. So I think that was pretty much their incentive. Anyone else? Yes?
What happened to your grandparents that were left?
So an interesting story about my grandparents, great question. My grandparents, they were very sick at the time, and when the Germans came and took over Hungary, because that was like 44, that they came into Hungary, they thought they were gonna die. So they were sick in bed, and they were high fevers, and they thought, well, we're not even gonna waste a bullet on them. They're older and they're probably just gonna die. So they left them, they recovered. And then a brother of my father's was hidden in a basement somewhere for that whole year or year and a half. And he was hidden in the basement. So my father was sent to a labor camp. And unfortunately, we didn't get the stories from the fathers because they passed away. So they also, I'm sure, had pretty incredible stories. Yes?
What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the publishing industry since you started with your first book?
Great question. So the biggest change I've seen is the growth of the smaller publishing companies like mine. I think before that it would be very difficult to get things to market and to get things published. But now what's happened is the big publishing houses, the very large ones, are very top heavy. They have big budgets that they have to fill. And if you're not a celebrity, they don't really want to deal with you. So then it becomes very difficult to get your book published. Whereas the small publishers are smaller, they're able to move a lot quicker, they're able to get things done easier, and they're not dealing with this big amount of money that they have to bring in. Also the marketing, I think I didn't realize when I started that the marketing is such a main component of this and so expensive. Even people that are well known, so the famous actors or actresses that write books, they're spending millions of dollars on marketing for those people that people already know about. So imagine if it's someone that's just anybody that wants to write a book. But I will tell you, and I think it's a good time to make this pitch, and I have told my friend Lainey that if you have a story, and all family stories are important. Mine happen to be about the Holocaust, it happened to be about, the Hungarian Revolution, but all family stories are important. And even if it's just to collect it for your own family, so that your children know what happened to their grandparents, that's valuable in itself. So maybe you don't go ahead and publish it and you don't market it, but even if you just did it for yourself and your children, it would be really worthwhile, because many people have said to me after I published my books, they wish they would have interviewed their parents. And once they're gone, the richness of the story is gone, because those details that only they know and they can provide are then lost. So I would encourage everybody in this room that you have a story, and it's a valuable story. Anyone else? Well, I thank you very much for joining me and allowing me to share my story with you. And those of you who have those cards, those lucky cards, you get a book today, free book that you can go home and read the story. I also, as I said, have donated all the books to the library, so they will be available at your library. And there are bookmarks from Kids Need to Read, so feel free to pick that up and learn more about them. I have my business cards there, which pick up. I've got my website, everything on there. Feel free to take a look. Thank you again. Appreciate your time.